the thing that made me think about this was we had a former staffer that needed notes this Monday, and I went through this. It was a short film script, and shout out to him. I'll keep it anonymous just in case, but you know who you are. I know you're listening. But the whole thing is um, taking it really seriously, and really, I let him know right away, like, hey, I spent 2 hours on this. Like,
Yep.
so please, you know, don't think that I skimmed this, or my goal was just to get through it and hand you back something that might make a 1% to 5% difference. No, I mean, I really want you to succeed. And I think so. The first thing that you start with a good note is, do you genuinely care about the person that's asking,
Mm.
for the note and for their success? And unfortunately, I mean, it's a question that you need to ask yourself. And if you're the one writing, you need to ask the person, or consider the fact that they may not necessarily want you to be super successful. But I wanted to just start by saying, the basis of it all is really close creative friendships and a lot of trust. There's a lot of trust there, and you don't want to violate that. So if you get the chance to give somebody notes, or if you're giving your script to someone for notes, you hope that they spend the time on it that's necessary. But I wanted to turn to Sam really quick and just say, have you ever written any screenplays yet? I actually don't know the answer to this.
Not entirely. I've
Okay.
tinkered with it.
Okay.
So I've done some like scene work, but I haven't made like a cohesive script, basically.
Okay, that's coming around the corner for you in school for sure.
Absolutely.
And I know you've given me stuff, that reviews you've written, to get notes on those, and to go through that and comb through it, and make it as good as possible. But when you do write a script, I hope you'll trust us enough to give you notes if you're worried about whether it's good or not. Because really, this is something that every creative wants and needs. Is this, because we all have this sort of creeping sort of doubt. But then on top of that, you sort of need somebody to work it out with you in terms, especially if you plan on shooting it. And I think that kind of leads to this idea of what is a good note, what is a bad note, right? And so a bad note tends to be one that is just opinions, right? And doesn't take you to script breakdown. And so unfortunately, we get a lot of those notes out there. There's a lot of notes that, even if the carrying was there, it was more opinion based notes and dialogue based notes, where it's like, oh, okay, well, maybe you should say this instead of that, or maybe the character would say this instead of that. And the time for that does come, but it doesn't come until you're shooting. It doesn't come until you have maybe actors or whatever. Those notes, unless the character really is responding in some weird way, I think most dialogue notes aren't going to be super useful if what they said doesn't change the storyline one way or the other, right? If the main thing that happens when dialogue is bad is, why don't you just take that out? Why don't you just like have him not say that, or have her not say that? Or how can we take this soliloquy that you wrote for this person that doesn't make any sense down to one sentence, and just have them say the thing that a human would say in response to that? But, so to me, that's one element of a bad note. And then other bad notes are just usually notes of ignorance, where it's kind of like, you gave this note, but you made my scene more complicated, or you made it more expensive to shoot, or you made it impossible to shoot, right? Or you don't know formatting, and you're harping on things like formatting, slug lines, and all these things, instead of focusing on story and the through line of the story, through a character, by the way. So I don't know. Those are some quick thoughts. Now, I will say this before you guys hop in. I think what makes a good note is the converse of that, which is the script ready for script breakdown? So if your PM comes in and they're starting to look at the script and try to figure out, the scenes and the scene list, the shot list, and you're working together on this with the director. A lot of times in indie film, the director is the writer. That's why I said it that way. But you're working on these things, are you going to get stopped somewhere where you're like, Oh no, this scene requires security presence on set. This scene requires potentially military presence on set, right? Like, so think about these big sort of action war scenes. Like, how are you going to pull that off? Are you expecting to spend that kind of money on this shot, right? The people involved. And I'll tell you, with the one I did on Monday, I said, look, this is a short film that you're doing for near $0. It's 17 pages long and you have 9 characters. You really need to think about that. That's too many. 9 people in a short film is a lot of people, especially for a young director, writer. Yes, you can give notes about the story and the characters, but can you also give practical notes about what it's going to take to actually shoot this and move forward in your career? So anyway, Nick.
Yeah. So you mentioned a lot of things, right?
Yeah.
And I think that the way that I would scope this in my head, and I'd love to hear feedback on this, but there's a lot of movies that I watch that I don't like. Right? I mean, we can admit that there's some things that we don't like. Yep. And some of these movies are the films that I watch with my kids. Right? Like, I wasn't, to be honest, like, I watched the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie that came out.
I didn't.
And I
look at Sam's face. You watched that?
Right. And
it's awesome.
No. And I wasn't. Listen. And
Yeah.
I wasn't initially a big fan.
Wait, which one?
The one it was
the new one.
Mayhem or whatever.
Yeah,
something like that. Yeah,
Mutant Mayhem.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I wasn't a fan.
I still didn't
when I first watched it. But listen. Here's the thing. That movie wasn't made for this perspective that I came to it with. Okay, so I was judging that movie on the wrong perspective. My kids loved it.
Yeah.
And I could see why, because even though that they've been into Turtles for a while, they've seen different things, this was kind of a reboot for them. It rehashed the story. It had all of this flashback stuff to retell the story, which I'm like, I know that story already. Or they changed it. And I'm thinking about it from my experience with the Turtles.
I knew it.
So now I'm like, this is stupid. I don't need all this stuff. But it laid the foundation for what they could do next, right? So the first thing that I think about with notes is like, you got to understand who the audience is for this story.
Yeah.
Right. So if the audience isn't for me, then it could be difficult for me to give proper notes.
You're right.
Unless I have the ability to put myself in someone else's shoes, which I can do. Not necessarily everyone can do that. I've got, like Chris and I, we've got kids, right? We got kids at different generations. So we can kind of say, okay, if I put myself in the college kid generation, what they're doing right now, let me put that hat on. Because I've been through those experiences with them. If I put myself in the, tween generation, if I put myself in that 8 to 10-year-old generation, like you can start to think that way, which I've come to learn how to do, because like when I watched Descendants 4 with my daughter, that's not necessarily the type of film that I enjoy. But then when I said, let me put myself in her shoes, I could see why she liked it so much and why it was so perfect for her. So for me, the first thing is, who is the audience for this film? Your notes need to be aligned with either the intended audience, or as you're reading it, you can say, hey, look, maybe this is actually better for this type of audience. You can think about audience in that way.
I think as a writer, that's kind of how you have to write too.
Yeah, you should be. But that's what I'm saying. So they're already doing that. What I'm saying is that as the person who's giving notes, I need to know that. I need to know. Don't just give me the script. Tell me who the audience is, right? And then, Sam, I know you want to jump in on that. So that's the first thing I want to say. Go ahead, Sam.
Well, and I just want to say this real quick here, Nick. Let's not pretend like you weren't excited for Descendants 4. Okay. We all know the real story there. You're bearing the lead.
Yeah. Red was really cool, I have to admit.
There we go. Okay. Just had to get that out the way. I totally agree with what you're saying, though. I think that you need to understand what not only the narrative is presenting, but who it's presenting it to. Exactly like you said. I think that if you lose the track of that, that's how, there's been a problem with Hollywood making R-rated movies and cutting them to be PG-13 because they see that it so late in the game that it should be suited for a different audience group. And I think that's because no one told them that the narrative that was in there initially would be better suited for a slightly younger group, right?
Okay.
It's bad note, right? There was no note there. They didn't get that letter saying, maybe we just need less swear words and then we can make it more accessible, right?
That note was probably there, but there was probably a little bit of contention around the note, right?
Yeah, I mean,
possibly.
I also think it could have just been ignored. I think that there's these examples of some of these films that like it would be so easy to change so little, and they could be seen in a whole different light, and yet they still release it in that manner. You see what I'm saying? Like,
the writer director wants it to be R. The studio wants it to be PG-13. It's that simple. And then there's a fight.
It could be, and then, but the notes early on before it gets to the studio, right? That could have happened. That said, hey, it doesn't have to be that. If you take this little thing out or you add this little thing in, to Sam's point, it could have a broader audience.
It's a relationship dance, though, right? Like, it's easy for us to say it, but it's so hard to like walk up to this person you have a development deal with, or you have a 5-film deal with, and say, hey, we're going to change your movie. I mean, you really do just sort of blow up everything when you make that. You got to have the right suit in the room, the right producer. You got to have the right people to sort of give that note. But that's why mercenaries are hard too, right, Nick? Because then you can't give a note where you're respected as part of the team. You're somebody from the outside telling me how to do my work, telling me how to do my art. I don't want to do that. So I think giving a note to a person who wants to make something and hasn't is actually much easier than to give a note to someone who has made a lot of stuff and done it really well for a long time.
Right. And I think there's also a big element, and I think that this goes for creatives, of being receptive for notes. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You get a note all day, right? If you ignore it, you ignore it.
Imagine telling Kanye West the snare needs to snap.
Exactly.
You'd be run out of the room.
Right. Yeah. But
with
so
prejudice.
Exactly. So here's the second thing I was thinking about, which is something you don't actually get that I would actually ask for. So especially in a short, I think that I would want to ask for, like, what was your intention with that scene? I would love it if the script actually came with that. I don't think that's standard. But I would love it if you
should be able to read it.
No, but that's the thing, is that's the note, right? Where it's like, the way you wrote this kind of feels like this. So I'm going to give you the note based on how I feel you wrote it. But that might not have been the intention of the writer. Yeah. So I'd love to be able to see, like, this is what I want you to feel. This is what the audience should know. This is what the audience should get from this. And then I can give the note on the intention, not on what I thought it was. Yeah. Right. So I think that would be nice to have that come along, especially short. I don't know. It would be of value for a full length, but I think in a short, it's like, yeah, I wrote this because I really want them to, I wanted them to hate this person.
Yeah.
Right. In this scene. And then you could be like, oh, okay. Yeah. You didn't hit the mark. Like,
yeah,
you just scratched the surface. Like yes, they did some bad things, but hate, you didn't hit it. Right. The language that you used wasn't enough, or the scenario that you put them in wasn't significant enough. And then I can give a note. But without that, now I'm giving my note on my interpretation that may not match their intention.